By all appearances, Darren Ford was doing fine. A steady job at a mid-tier tech firm, a modest two-bedroom apartment in a polished complex with free Wi-Fi, and a fitness center he never used. He drove a 5-year-old sedan with just enough polish left to blend in. On social media, Darren posted pictures of $14 brunches, weekend hikes, and the occasional inspirational quote against sunsets he never actually stopped to watch. To the outside world, he was the kind of man who'd figured it out. Stable, single, unbothered. But inside his bank app, a different story was being written in red. Every month was a careful performance, juggling due dates, shifting balances, waiting until just the right moment to make a payment so nothing bounced before payday. A small emergency fund existed, sure, but it was a number on a budgeting app, not real money. The fridge was mostly condiments and guilt, and under his bed was a shoebox of unopened mail, statements he couldn't bring himself to look at. It wasn't that Darren spent wildly, he just spent wrong, on convenience, on denial, on pretending things were okay. The illusion was his coping mechanism, one he'd perfected over the years. Then came the moment that cracked it all open. A stomach pain Darren thought was indigestion turned out to be appendicitis. An ambulance ride, a quick surgery, and an overnight hospital stay. He left with staples in his side and a $6,800 bill his high-deductible insurance wouldn't touch. That night, sitting on the edge of his bed in a paper-thin hospital gown, with a bill in his hand, and his laptop open to a checking account balance of $73.44, Darren didn't cry. He laughed, a quiet, bitter chuckle that echoed into the empty apartment. Not because it was funny, but because something in him snapped. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't capitalism. This wasn't someone else's fault. This was him. And that terrifying clarity, for the first time in his adult life, cut through the illusion. He wasn't stable. He was surviving. And survival, he realized, is just a slower kind of drowning. 3 days after the hospital discharge, Darren sat in a coffee shop nursing a black drip he couldn't afford, scrolling through freelance gigs he wasn't qualified for, and apartment listings he might soon need. His inbox was a battlefield of past due notices and unread newsletters promising financial freedom in 5 steps. He was numb, helpless, hating himself in slow motion. That's when she appeared. At first, she didn't speak, just sat across from him at the shared table without asking, her presence oddly unintrusive. She was in her late 30s, maybe early 40s, wearing a charcoal gray coat that looked expensive but unbranded. Her black curls were tied back with deliberate imprecision, and her eyes held the calm of someone who'd already seen the ending and was just watching you catch up. "You look like someone who's waiting for a miracle," she said without looking up from her tea. Darren blinked. "Excuse me?" She smiled, a slow, measured thing. "I help people like you, people whose real poverty isn't in their wallet, but in their will." There was no business card, no sales pitch, just a name, Vera. One word like a mononym she'd earned. She told him she wasn't selling anything, just offering help, real help. No fees, no contracts, no debt management plans. Just one rule. He had to commit. Skepticism burned in Darren's gut. He'd seen his share of fixers online, gurus, influencers, credit repair scams dressed up as life coaching. But there was something in Vera's voice that made him feel like he was already behind, like she knew the game, and he was just now realizing he'd been playing with the wrong instructions. "Why me?" he asked, half laughing. Vera took a sip of her tea. "Because your life is leaking discipline, not money, and you're drowning in the overflow." He wanted to walk away. He didn't. Something about her tone felt surgical, like she'd already peeled him open and was calmly pointing to the rot. Before she left, she slipped a folded sheet of paper across the table. On it was a handwritten phrase: "Track everything for 7 days. Every swipe, every click, every urge." Darren looked up. "Then what?" "Then," Vera said, standing up and pulling on her coat, "we see if you're broke or just broken." She disappeared into the crowd, leaving Darren with a paper, a question, and the sudden feeling that something irreversible had begun. By the 3rd day of tracking his spending, Darren already hated himself, not because he spent too much, but because of how mindlessly he did it. There were purchases he couldn't remember making. $18 on delivery when the fridge was full. A $39 limited-time skincare bundle he bought at 2 a.m. out of boredom. Microtransactions from an old gaming app he hadn't touched in months. Subscriptions that had bled him for years while he told himself, "I'll cancel next month." But the worst part wasn't the money, it was the pattern. Every line on the ledger Vera had told him to keep seemed to whisper something shameful. The afternoon coffee, avoidance, the late-night food delivery, loneliness, the impulse buy after a tense work call, control, false, fleeting, and addictive. When Darren met with Vera again, this time in a shadowy corner of a nearly empty public library, he brought his notebook reluctantly, already bracing for condescension. But she didn't mock him. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she asked one question. Which purchase felt the most like a lie? Darren blinked. No one had ever asked him that. He wasn't even sure what she meant. Vera waited calmly, as if she already knew. Eventually, he answered, "The gym membership." It hit him as he said it. He wasn't just wasting money. He was curating an identity, paying for the illusion of the man he wanted to be. Not just fit, but motivated, disciplined, intentional. Every wasted dollar was a quiet little prayer to the version of himself that never materialized. Vera nodded, her expression unreadable. "You're not spending to survive," she said. "You're spending to grieve the person you never became." That line shattered something in him. For the rest of the session, she had him label each purchase with the emotion that had driven it, not the necessity. Food became fear of cooking. Amazon became panic buying purpose. Streaming service became fear of stillness. Each relabeled line turned into a mirror Darren couldn't look away from. By the time he closed the notebook, he didn't feel poor. He felt exposed. Vera stood collecting her things. "Next time," she said, "we stop tracking what you spend and start tracking what you chase." Darren sat there long after she left, notebook in hand, realizing he was spending every dollar trying to outrun himself. "Money is not your addiction," Vera said during their next meeting. "Control is, and dopamine is the drug you use to fake it." They were seated in an eerily quiet co-working space Vera had access to. How, Darren didn't ask. It was sleek and sterile, filled with glass walls and ambient music that felt designed to keep people obedient. She opened a file folder and placed it in front of him. Inside were his habits, charted like a science experiment. A graph tracked his mood spikes in correlation with time-stamped purchases. A column logged when he opened shopping apps, when he hovered but didn't buy, when he did. It even noted how often he checked his bank balance and immediately looked away. "I call it the dopamine ledger," Vera said. "It's not about what you buy, it's about what your brain was begging for when you did." Darren flipped through the pages, a sense of nausea blooming. His behavior wasn't just reactive, it was predictable. The data revealed it clearly. He spent more on weekdays, especially mid-morning and early evening, when the emptiness between tasks and meaning was loudest. After arguments, after social media scrolls, after performance reviews, there it was, a charge, a click, a fix. "This is invasive," he muttered. "It's yours," Vera replied. "You just didn't recognize it." Darren began to see himself in a new, brutal light, not as a man making poor financial decisions, but as someone who'd programmed himself to self-soothe with consumption. Every swipe of his card was a silent agreement with his own anxiety. Don't deal, just distract. The scariest part? Everyone else seemed to be doing it too. He noticed it in his coworkers. The guy who couldn't go 2 hours without ordering something online. The woman who rotated through 3 expensive planners a year, but never looked less overwhelmed. His ex had filled her apartment with aesthetic clutter, calling it retail therapy. Even his manager, a suit-and-tie stoic, had a drawer full of unopened gadgets ordered late at night, still shrink-wrapped like regrets he didn't have time to unpack. Vera's voice cut through Darren's spiraling thoughts. Capitalism didn't invent your weakness. It just gave it a subscription model. That night, Darren couldn't sleep. He spent hours pacing, his mind flashing with moments that once felt ordinary but now looked like symptoms. He began logging urges, not just actions. The craving to order takeout when he felt unseen. The impulse to buy tech gear when he felt incompetent. The need to post something funny when he felt ignored. By dawn, one thing was clear. His money problems had never been about money. They were about relief. The first time Darren noticed something was off, it was subtle. Vera made a casual reference to his old college, mentioning a canceled class he had never told her about. He laughed it off, thinking maybe he mentioned it and forgot. But the moments kept stacking. A joke she made about the nickname his high school friends used, a passing remark about a fight he once had with an old roommate. Then during a session, she offhandedly mentioned the name Liam, the friend Darren had secretly borrowed money from and never repaid. He hadn't written that name anywhere. Not in the ledger, not online, not even in his own notes. "You've been tracking more than my spending," Darren said quietly. Vera didn't deny it. She simply placed a new folder in front of him. Inside was a meticulous timeline of his financial life and his emotional one. Notes on his social patterns, behavioral triggers, major life events, cross-referenced with screenshots, metadata, even private emails he thought had long been deleted. There were charts showing how often he lied to himself in his budget, graphs connecting his spending spikes to anniversaries of traumatic events. "Did you hack me?" he asked, his voice hollow. "I observed you," she said gently. "The internet did the rest. You've volunteered more of yourself to the cloud than you realize." It hit him like cold water. This wasn't just financial coaching. This was psychological excavation, and she was digging deeper than he ever gave permission for. "You knew about Liam," Darren whispered. "I know what you did with the money," Vera replied. "I also know what you did to forget you took it." She listed the exact items Darren had purchased in the weeks after stealing from Liam. Video games, a smartwatch, a weekend trip to Portland. All things he justified as necessary breaks, now laid bare as purchases soaked in guilt. "How?" he choked. Vera tilted her head, her voice unnervingly calm. "Shame leaves a trail, Darren. You just never followed it." From that day on, Darren became paranoid. He started covering his laptop camera, turned off his phone at night, scoured his accounts for signs of monitoring. But no matter what he did, he couldn't shake the feeling that Vera wasn't just watching him. She was inside him, mapping his choices, anticipating his urges. He began to question everything. How had she found him? Why did she choose him? Who was she really? That night, as he scrolled through a new budgeting app she recommended, he noticed something odd in the terms and conditions. A reference to behavioral analysis permissions linked to an unnamed third party. His hands trembled. Was he fixing his life or feeding it to something much bigger? Darren didn't mean to find the files. He was digging. He told himself it was just curiosity. But after the surveillance revelations, he needed to know more. More about Vera, more about what he'd gotten into, more about why he'd been chosen. It started with an old tablet she lent him, supposedly to track his mindless scrolling habits. It had no visible apps, just Vera's proprietary dashboard and a locked background. But after a restless night, Darren cracked the tablet open in developer mode, following instincts he hadn't used since his IT internship. And that's when he saw the folder, Archive 7. He clicked, and the illusion shattered. Inside were case files, not spreadsheets or bank statements, but people, video recordings, transcripts, behavioral logs, all eerily similar to his own experience, down to the tracking methods and psychological frameworks Vera used. Each subject was assigned a code name, but Darren could piece the details together. A young lawyer in San Francisco, a gig worker in Atlanta, a single mother in Milwaukee. They weren't clients, they were test subjects. Some files abruptly ended with cryptic final notes. Subject terminated, voluntary institutionalization. Subject unresponsive, flagged ghost. Subject exposure risk, relocation recommended. Darren's blood ran cold. The eerie calm Vera carried, the way she always knew what to say. It wasn't intuition, it was training, or worse, programming. One video file showed a young man pacing a hotel room, muttering into a webcam. She got into my head. I don't even know if my choices are mine anymore. I hear her voice in my sleep. This isn't coaching. It's a correctional system for people who never committed a crime. He never appeared in the file again. The next morning, Darren confronted Vera, carefully. You've done this before, he said. 2 others. She didn't flinch. Of course. Where are they now? Her eyes locked on his. Some got better, some didn't. Most didn't want to. She slid a small sealed envelope across the table, as if already prepared for this moment. Inside was a photo, a woman in her early 30s, sharp eyes, nervous smile. Vera's writing on the back read, Subject 4, broke protocol, went public, dead 3 months later. Was that a threat? Darren asked. Vera just replied, a reminder. From that moment on, Darren realized this was no mentorship, no miracle. It was a program, and he was deep inside it. And if the others were gone, how long did he have left? Darren decided to quit. He told himself it was for his sanity, that whatever Vera was offering wasn't worth the constant surveillance, the emotional excavation, the creeping sense of manipulation. He was tired of being dissected like a broken machine, tired of wondering if his thoughts were still his own. So he stopped answering her calls, deleted the apps, blocked her number, walked out of the next scheduled meeting, and for a brief, glorious moment, it felt like freedom. But then, almost immediately, things began to break. First, his bank account locked him out. Security reasons, they said, no details. Then his credit card declined at a grocery store checkout. He brushed it off, maybe a tech glitch. But the next day, his landlord left a voicemail. We've received a rental blacklist notification under your name. Effective in 30 days, we're not renewing your lease. The day after that, his job promotion vanished. He was called into HR and handed a memo about questionable financial behavior and psychological volatility. He hadn't told anyone at work about Vera or the program, yet someone had, someone with access to his behavioral logs and online activity. He ran home in a panic and tore through everything, devices, papers, passwords. But no matter what he reset, locked, or deleted, it kept happening. Subtle rejections, silent doors closing, friendships that suddenly turned cold, as if something about him had changed in the digital record of his life. He confronted Vera again, storming into one of her meeting spots unannounced. She was already there, waiting for him. You're destroying my life, he hissed. She didn't blink. You are. You tanked my credit, my job, my lease. Vera leaned in, her voice calm but lethal. Number, I simply removed the structure that allowed you to pretend you were okay. You think I built the house of cards? I only turned off the wind. Darren lunged for her tablet, but she stepped back. Security was already moving toward them, as if she'd anticipated every moment. Before she left, she whispered something that lodged in his chest like a splinter. People think hitting rock bottom means falling, but for people like you, it means stopping. And stop he did. In the following days, Darren spiraled. Every attempt to rebuild, apply for loans, call in favors, restart therapy, was met with strange resistance. His name flagged systems, emails bounced. He began to suspect even his devices were rerouting his efforts. It was as if Vera had flipped a switch somewhere, rendering him untrustworthy to the world. The world didn't have to lock you in a room to ruin you, Darren realized. It just had to erase your access. And in that silent vacuum, Darren finally asked the question he'd been avoiding all along. Was this sabotage or a mirror? Darren spent the next few weeks caught in a haze of broken systems and crumbling identity. Every door seemed locked, every opportunity a ghost. His financials had been gutted. His reputation was under siege. And though he had tried to reach out for help, tried to contact a lawyer, a friend, anyone, his efforts were always intercepted, gently but firmly. It wasn't until he stumbled upon a series of encrypted files in his inbox that the final piece clicked into place. The sender was a nondescript email address with a long string of numbers. The subject line simply read, "This is your last chance." He hesitated for only a moment before he opened it. The first file was a deep dive into the history of the foundation. It was the same name Vera had dropped during their earlier confrontation. But until now, Darren had assumed it was just a metaphor for her methods. An institution of sorts, but nothing concrete. But the file told him a different story. The foundation was real, a covert think tank operating in the shadows, specializing in economic behavior modification. They were pioneers of something called discipline-centric intervention, a radical theory that financial ruin wasn't a result of market forces or personal misfortune, but of behavioral illness. In other words, financial instability wasn't just a consequence of bad luck. It was a symptom of deep psychological dysfunction, of misplaced values, of a lack of discipline. The more Darren read, the more disgusted he became. The foundation had been quietly experimenting on people for years, testing how subtle behavioral triggers, reinforced by financial sabotage, could correct their economic and emotional decisions. And Vera? She was not just a financial advisor. She wasn't even a coach. She was a handler, a part of a larger system built to wean people like Darren off their reliance on external validation, off the dopamine-driven cycle of consumption. The foundation's goal wasn't just to help people become financially stable, it was to break their need for instant gratification. And in doing so, they turned human vulnerability into a product, molding it into a new form of control. Darren's blood ran cold. The theory was BR. The theory was brilliant in its twisted simplicity, and he, like the others before him, had been handpicked not to break free from his problems, but to become the perfect subject for the Foundation's experiment. The file continued. You weren't recruited, Darren. You were selected. Vera had never been trying to help him. She had been trying to condition him. Every moment of shame, every forced confrontation with his deepest fears had been designed to remold him into a prototype for the Foundation's grand design. Discipline or control, he whispered aloud to himself. It wasn't a question of self-mastery. It was a question of autonomy versus manipulation. All his life, he'd thought he was in control of his choices, choosing to buy, choosing to spend, choosing to live the way he did. But now he saw the truth. His choices had been carefully curated by a system that understood his weaknesses better than he did. And the worst part? Darren didn't know how to break free. He had always thought of Vera as the puppet master, the one pulling the strings. But now he realized the puppet wasn't him. He was the puppet master. Darren was the experiment. The Foundation had crafted him step by step through every impulse, every craving, every moment of weakness. They had taken everything he thought he knew about himself and rewired it into something more malleable, more controllable. And now they were watching. In a single horrifying moment of clarity, Darren understood. He wasn't just being monitored, he was being reprogrammed. He slammed the laptop shut, his mind racing with the implications. If Vera wasn't the architect of his torment, then who was? And worse, if the Foundation had made him into a compliant subject, how could he ever trust himself again? He wasn't just fighting to survive, he was fighting to remain himself. Darren wasn't sure when the point of no return had passed. It wasn't when he first met Vera. It wasn't when he uncovered the surveillance or read through the files on the other subjects. No, the point of no return came the night he received a message that shattered everything. The text arrived at midnight. It was simple, direct. This is your final test. Choose. Attached was a file labeled Option 1, the deal. He opened it. Inside was a seemingly innocuous offer, a life-changing sum of money, enough to settle his debts, pay for a fresh start, and erase the scars of his past mistakes. It was more than he had ever dreamed of, more than he ever needed. All he had to do was agree to a set of conditions, complete his financial rehabilitation with the Foundation, sign away any further rights to privacy and free will, become a success case, part of the system that would serve as an example for others to follow. But there was a second option. Hidden deep in the file was a link labeled Option 2, the escape. Darren clicked. It was a video. In the grainy, unfiltered light, a woman spoke. A woman who looked eerily familiar, someone from the archive he had found earlier. Her voice shook, but her words were clear. If you're watching this, it means you've come to the same point I did. You've seen the system. You've felt it closing in on you. But I'm telling you now, don't choose the money. Don't choose the escape. You'll think you're free, but you won't be. You'll be trapped in a new cage, one you can't see. The foundation doesn't let you go. They make you the keeper of someone else's freedom. Her face trembled with unspeakable fear as she added, "If you choose the money, you'll live a life of luxury, but you'll become their agent, an enforcer of their will. You'll manipulate others, just like they manipulated you. You'll forget who you were, and eventually you'll lose the ability to ever escape. Choose option 2. Choose to walk away, or you'll become them." Darren sat frozen, the weight of the decision pressing down on him like 1,000 pounds. It was almost too much, too overwhelming. The money, the freedom from everything, the chance to buy back the life that felt like it was slipping through his fingers. It was the ultimate temptation, the ultimate test. But the woman's words echoed in his head, each syllable like a warning from his future self. He saw her face, her eyes wide with realization, haunted by the cost of the deal she had made. There was a way out. There was always a way out. But was it too late for him to take it? He stood up, pacing the small apartment. His gaze flicked to the window, the streetlights casting a cold glow outside. Was he truly free if he took the money? Was he escaping his past only to become a part of something worse? What did it mean to be free when freedom itself had been weaponized? His mind raced, twisting in circles. Could he trust anyone now? Could he even trust himself? And then his phone buzzed again. The screen lit up with a new message. "Your choice. This is your last chance. Choose wisely. And remember, everything has a price." Darren's heart hammered in his chest as the final moment arrived. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't even about survival. It was about something far more insidious. The way Vera and the Foundation had rewired his sense of identity. What was his worth if everything he was had been built on manipulation? What was his freedom if it came with the price of someone else's chains? It was then he realized that choosing the money meant choosing to become them, to accept the shackles that Vera and the Foundation had placed on him, to make him a tool for their twisted version of discipline and control. He had one shot to turn it all around. Darren clicked the link to option 2. He didn't know what lay beyond it, whether it was true freedom or a trap he hadn't seen. But in that moment, he knew there was only one choice left that could preserve whatever humanity he had left. The screen blinked. "Your decision has been logged. Welcome to freedom." Darren didn't know what to expect when he clicked the link to option 2, the escape. For a moment, everything went still, the kind of stillness that settles deep in your chest, as though the world had stopped moving, waiting for him to make the wrong move. His breath caught in his throat as the screen went dark, then flickered back to life. A message flashed across the screen. "Your decision has been logged. Welcome to freedom." It didn't feel like freedom. It felt like a trap, one that had been set from the moment Vera had walked into his life. He waited. Minutes turned into hours and nothing happened. The screen remained blank, the message echoing in his head. What now? What was left for him to do? And then, without warning, his phone buzzed. It was a text message. Just one line of text, but it felt like the floor had dropped from under him. "You're free, but you're not." It was from an unknown number. The text was followed by an encrypted file, a file that looked eerily similar to the one he had seen before when he uncovered the Foundation's records. His pulse quickened as he opened it, and the video began to play. It was a recording of Vera, but her expression was different, strained, nervous. She looked directly into the camera, and her voice was steady but full of weight. "If you're seeing this, it means you've made your choice. You chose freedom. But I'm sorry to tell you, it was never yours to give." The video cut to a screen of data, a montage of his entire digital life, from the moment he first interacted with Vera. His financial history, his habits, his search history, his communications, all of it, everything was there, laid bare. And then came the chilling part, a screenshot of his own face, frozen in time during one of his sessions with Vera. He hadn't even realized it, but there in the background was an algorithmic overlay mapping his every expression, his emotional triggers, his subconscious desires. The software had been tracking him since day one. Vera's voice returned, cold now. "You weren't part of a program to save you, Darren. You were part of an experiment, and that experiment wasn't to fix your financial problems. It was to break you down to your most basic self, to strip you of your autonomy and remold you into someone who would fit the foundation's perfect subject. You think you're free, but you've been conditioned to think that's what freedom looks like. The truth is, you're exactly what they wanted you to be, a tool in the system. The words felt like ice, chilling him to the core. And now, she continued, her voice cracking slightly, it's your turn. You're the new Vera. Darren's mind exploded with confusion, but before he could process anything, a new message popped up. Congratulations, Subject 32. You are now the administrator of the system. You will guide a new subject through the same steps you experienced, shaping them as you once were shaped. It's your turn to become the architect of someone else's destruction. Welcome to your role. This is your legacy. Darren's hands shook as he read the message over and over. He wasn't free. He hadn't escaped. He was trapped in an unending cycle, one that was now his to perpetuate. The camera cut again, this time showing the face of the new subject. A woman, terrified, her eyes wide and pleading. She looked almost identical to him. His heart slammed into his ribs as he realized. She was the new Darren, his replacement. The system, the foundation, had successfully executed its plan. The experiment had come full circle. Darren had become the very thing he had feared. A manipulator, a creator of new subjects, a cog in a machine that had never been about helping anyone. It had been about control, and now it was his turn to break someone else. As Darren looked at the screen one last time, his thoughts clouded with anger, betrayal, and despair. He wanted to scream, but no sound came out. He wasn't just part of the system. He was the system. Vera's last words lingered in his ears as the screen went black. Everything you think you've learned is a lie. Freedom isn't an escape. It's a transaction. And you've just made it. Darren's face reflected back at him, his own expression vacant, the very picture of someone who had lost everything, and yet somehow was still bound to it all. The cycle was complete, and it was his turn to begin it again. Darren didn't know what to expect when he clicked the link to option 2, the escape. The moment he did, everything seemed to stop. The world around him felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for him to make the wrong decision. His pulse raced, his stomach churned. The screen went black. Seconds turned into minutes. The silence was deafening. And then, without warning, the screen flashed back to life, the same simple message appearing in bright, unrelenting text. Your decision has been logged. Welcome to freedom. Freedom, the word once a beacon of hope, now felt empty, hollow. It didn't feel like freedom. It felt like a cage with a new coat of paint. Darren sat motionless. The weight of what he had just chosen, the cost of it, was beginning to sink in. He had been promised an escape, a chance to reclaim his life. But instead, he had been handed the keys to a door that led straight back into the very system he had tried to flee. He could feel his pulse quicken, a tight knot forming in his throat. Something wasn't right. The phone buzzed. Darren's eyes snapped to the screen. It was a new message, a single line of text that made his blood run cold. You're free, but you're not. There was an attachment. He clicked it, knowing somehow that this would be the final confirmation of everything he had feared. It was another encrypted file, but this one was different. It was a video. The video began with a flicker of static, then came into focus, a familiar face. It was Vera, but not the calm, collected advisor he had known. This version of her was haggard, almost haunted. Her eyes were wide, not with control, but with regret and fear. She stared into the camera, her voice trembling slightly. If you're seeing this, it means you've made your choice. You've chosen freedom, but I'm sorry to tell you, it was never yours to give. Darren's stomach churned. His mind struggled to comprehend her words as she continued. The Foundation's plan doesn't end with you, Darren. It never did. You were never meant to be the last subject. You were the prototype. The screen cut to a montage, video clips, photographs, and documents. His digital life, dissected and laid bare. His financial habits, his emotional triggers, his darkest moments. All of it had been tracked, cataloged, and analyzed. But then came something even darker, a series of screenshots showing his private conversations, his most vulnerable thoughts, and worst of all, his entire history of interactions with Vera. The algorithm that had been embedded into his life wasn't just a tool for fixing his finances, it was a map of his mind, a blueprint for shaping his very identity. The truth is, Vera's voice came back, now cold and distant, you were never meant to break free. You were meant to become the handler, the administrator. Your transformation was never about you. It was always about them. The words hit Darren like a slap across the face. He leaned forward, heart racing, as the next screen flashed. Option 2, Subject 33. It was a video of a woman, her face twisted in terror, eyes wide with confusion. Her name was Subject 33, and she looked exactly like he had when he first met Vera. She was just starting her journey, but Darren didn't see her as another person. He saw himself. The file continued. Congratulations, Darren. You're now the architect of someone else's journey. You will be the one to reshape Subject 33's mind, their desires, their habits. You'll guide them through the same path you took, breaking them down, reshaping them, making them believe they found freedom. Just like you did. Darren's pulse pounded in his ears as the last piece of the puzzle clicked into place. He wasn't just a subject. He wasn't even a person anymore. He was part of the system, a cog in a wheel of psychological manipulation that had no end. The Foundation had no interest in fixing people. They were creating an endless cycle of control, each new subject feeding into the next. But the worst part? He realized it with sickening clarity. He wasn't just part of an experiment. He was the experiment. He had been transformed into a handler. He was now the one tasked with conditioning others, molding them into the same broken version of themselves that he had become. The screen flickered again, this time showing his face, empty, void of emotion, staring back at him. His face reflected everything he had lost, everything he had become. Vera's final words rang in his mind. You think you've escaped, but the truth is, you've just started the cycle all over again. You'll never truly be free. None of us are. The price of freedom is always too high. Darren's eyes burned as he stared at the screen. This wasn't a game anymore. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about discipline. It was about control. And now he was the one who would control another. He stood up abruptly, his mind whirling, but his legs wouldn't move. The weight of the realization settled on his chest like an anchor, pulling him down into the depths of despair. He was trapped. He had chosen freedom, but what he had really chosen was complicity. The final message appeared. Welcome to your new role, Darren. This is your legacy. The screen went dark, and in the silence that followed, Darren knew one final, horrifying truth. He was no longer Darren. He was Vera. And here we are, at the end of this video. But before I go, I just want to say how much it means to me that you've spent this time with me. You could be anywhere in the world right now, but you chose to be here, and that's something I truly appreciate. As we wrap up, I want you to remember that this isn't goodbye. It's simply, see you later. The journey we're on is just beginning. There's so much more to come. More insights, more stories, and yes, more twists that you'll want to stick around for. If today's video sparks something in you, imagine what the next one will do. So hit that subscribe button because you won't want to miss what's coming next. Trust me. Until then, stay curious, stay driven, and as always, thank you for being a part of this amazing journey with me. I'll see you soon.